Hello YouTube and welcome back to another 3D ROS tutorial. In this one we're going to follow along and create a stick grenade just like this one here. So this is perfect because it's got the cylindrical shapes that can be a problem when baking high to low. So let's just see how that goes. So I've downloaded the image. I'm just going to create a plane as our reference plane. Just taking off the subdivisions and adding a material. And we're just going to add that reference image. Here we go. And to get it the same aspect ratio, I'm just going to type in the pixels. So it's 463 by 280. Now that is the correct aspect ratio, and we can scale it up and down as we wish. I'm just going to rotate this plane just so it's in a correct angle and add it to a layer, and I'm going to make sure this is R, and that means we can no longer select it. So as this title suggests, we're going to create it using the low to high poly method. So we're creating the low poly first. So I'm just going to bring in a cylinder. We can choose how many divisions we want. I think 20 is fine for this. We could get away with a bit smaller if it's going to be close to you. But I'm going to keep it 20. And it helps to be in divisions of 4. That way we can split the model this way, and we can also split the model this way. But that's just personal preference. You don't always have to do that. And I'm just going to go into side view. And we're going to start creating our mesh. So I'm just going to move this up, select the faces, extrude. And again, we don't want a lot of extrusions because that'll add more divisions and increase our try count. So we're going to have to try and get away with as little as possible. So if it affects the silhouette, we want to do it. If it's not going to affect the silhouette, we don't want to do it. And as you can see, I've added one extra. So I'm just going to bring that down like that. And there we go. So we can decide to add these as separate pieces or keep them as one. Just for speed, I'm going to keep them as one piece. And there is a lip on that part of the image. So we do have a lip here, and it's just up to us if we want to add that geometry in or not. To keep this as low as possible and for demonstration purposes, I am not going to add that in. But depending on how close this is going to be to the camera, you might want to. So the next part of the image definitely affects the silhouette because this comes out quite a lot. So I'm just going to extrude and scale that out. And then scale up. And then in a bit, I'm going to keep this lip because it does add to the silhouette a fair amount. I'm going to extrude that up, and although it looks curved here, that's just the perspective of the image. It is actually flat. So I'm just going to go up to here and keep this flat. And now we have the bottom to do. Again, this has got a lip, but it isn't that big. So I'm just going to scale down again, straight down. And this is our very low poly mesh. As you can see, we've got some funkiness going on here. To fix this, we're just going to use smooth selection. So I'm going to, with my model selected, hold shift, right click, soft hard selection, soft edges. It's going to make all the edges soft. But where the edges is 90 degrees or more, we want hard edges. So I'm just going to select the hard edges by shift double clicking on them, and that'll select the loop all the way around. Shift, right click, hard edges again. And this is our final low poly mesh. So when we're UV mapping, one thing you want to keep in mind with low to high poly as well, again, if it is 90 degrees or more where we have the hard edges, this is where we want to add a UV seam. So I'm not going to go over UVing in this video. I will be creating a tutorial on that in the future, and a course of creating a detailed asset from start to finish. So once that course is out, the link will be in the description. But for now, we're going to just quickly UV map this model. So this is our UV editor. I'm just going to put this on my second screen for now. Don't worry, you won't miss anything. So I'm going to go to UV camera base. And what this does is it UV projects it from the camera's position. So we get the UV like this. Of course, there's a lot of overlapping and stretching, and we're not going to use this. However, this is a good base to go from, because with that there is no UV seams. From there we can just go in and create our UV seams. So I'm just going to go to edge, double click, and just add our UV seams on here. If you're familiar with this workflow, that's great. If not, I'll add a link in the description. So I'm just going to go to UV editor with them selected, and in the UV editor I'm going to go to cut sew, and I'm going to cut, and that basically adds a UV seam. Now if we go to object mode, you can see them seams are now white. So now we have that, we can unwrap. However, going round here is a constant loop, and we want another seam there. So I'm just going to add that seam to the back of this mesh. So double click, and this seam's going to go all the way down. We don't need this seam on the flat faces, the faces that aren't curved, because we're just going to planar project them. So I'm just going to deselect them. And now I'm going to do the same, cut sew, cut, and now we've added that as well. So we can UV shell, and now these are separated into UV shells. And from here you can shift right click, unfold, and sometimes this will work good, sometimes this won't work great. As you can see, it's quite slanted. Usually you want this straight, so to do this we can just go UV cylindrical, and we can do 360 in the attribute editor, and just scale this down until these squares are square. So you just want to do that with all of the pieces. I'm just going to see if I can get away with unfold for most of them though, just to save time for this video. And then the flat faces, I'm just going to planar project. So select all the faces facing in the same direction that are flat, hit UV, planar, and we want to make sure this gizmo is facing up and down. So I'm going to go 90, and then just do a square number, so 200 by 200, something like that. Now we all have this UV'd, we'll want to make sure the tiles are the same size. So in the UV editor, I'm just going to right click, hold right click, go to UV shells, select it all. And then if I hit UV editor again, it'll bring up this UV toolkit window if it's not already open. And I'm just going to transform, texel density, I'm just going to get, and then go set, and that sets them all to the same relative size in the scene. Now they're all the same size, I'm just going to go to modify layout. Once that's laid out on the UV map, it's time to do our high poly mesh. So I'm just going to export this out, file, export, and I'm going to put it in a new folder. Oh, I've created the folder there, stick grenade underscore LP. Now we're creating the high poly. So if we look in the reference, we have bumps here and bumps there. So we can just go into our view, and we can start adding the subdivision loops like I showed you earlier. Add that, and here maybe. No, I'll add it further down. A little lip there. So this whole section's coming out, so I'm going to select all of these edges and I'm going to hit extrude, and I'm going to bring them out just a little bit, not too far, and then the extra parts that are coming out, I'm just going to extrude them and maybe extrude a little piece at the bottom. I'm not sure if this is in the reference, but we're just going to go for it. And we're going to do the same for wherever else we need. So this part again, just go on the side view. I'm going to turn X-ray off and just reduce the lambda. So add another loop here, another loop here. This one's a bit too big, so we're just going to push that in. Again, you want to make sure you don't go too crazy and change the silhouette. So I couldn't just start doing this and go, oh, this needs to be bigger, because that's going to be nowhere near the low poly bands for when we're baking. Just the subtle areas. And in that, I've just realised I haven't extruded this whole section out, so I'm just going to do that a little bit now, and then do the extra parts that are coming out now. And then I'm just going to offset it a little bit so it pinches in, and that way we might get this nice bevel in our normal. I'm just going to pinch these in a little bit as well, just using the scale tool. And from there we got them bits coming out here, and we can add some of the little dimple spheres. So if we just snap that to the edge, again, this isn't quite a modeling tutorial, but showing you the general workflow. So we can add these little bits here. Of course, we don't want them coming out too much from the geometry, but if we just add them there, and let's say we want 6. We either want 6 or 4. We'll just do 4. So now set the pivot point to the center of this grenade. If I duplicate and just rotate around 90 degrees and keep doing that multiple times, we'll get it the same distance apart. And now with that, we're just going to bevel the model, and then we're done. So we can either use the subdivision loops or we can bevel. Of course, we don't want to bevel these edges because then we'll get strange results. But I'm just going to quickly use this method, and then once we're done, we'll come back. Again, you don't want to put these edge loops too far from the original geometry, because then the curve will become too much and it'll be unsupported by the normal map. And remember, the closer you get to the edge, the sharper the gradient will be, the sharper the bevel will be. Now we have that looking nice and smooth. I'm also going to fix the top. If you can, you want to avoid triangles when you're doing your high poly, but I'm just going to do this to add the edge loop and then merge the center. And there we go. We now have our high poly. And just a little trick, because these are extra geometry from the original, we won't be able to color them differently. So if you want to mask certain parts from your high poly, you can add a separate material onto them and change the color, and this will create an ID mask within the baking program. Now I'm just going to save this before we smooth it. I'm just going to combine everything, turn off preview smooth and hit smooth. Now we have our high poly mesh ready to bake. Now I'm just going to file, export selection, and I'm just going to call it the same. Spelled grenade wrong, but that's fine, just as long as it's named the same, and underscore high poly. And from there we're going to go into the baking package and bake this out. Right, I'm going to bake in Substance Painter, so here we are in Substance Painter. I'm just going to go File, New, Select, and we're going to find our stick grenade and the low poly model. We're going to open that up. So one thing you want to know, unless you want to make multiple maps, is you want to make sure every bit of geometry that you have is on the same material. And as you can see, once we've loaded this up, we've got some strange smoothing issues at the bottom, which tells me we haven't made this a hard edge. So I'm just going to quickly go back into Maya and make that a hard edge. Now with that smoothing issue hopefully fixed, we can bake. So if we go into the texture set settings, and we go down to Bake Mesh Maps, and under the high definition meshes, we want to select this icon and choose our high poly. And I'm just going to bake in 2K just so it's quicker for this tutorial. So now changing the max frontal distance and the max rear distance, this is the cage, so the further we get away from the mesh, we want to increase these values. The further the high poly gets away from the low poly, we want to increase these values. Of course we don't want to go too far though, as we'll start getting strange results in our baking. I'm just going to leave it here how it is for now, just to see how it looks, and we might need to change it later. So anti-aliasing I'm just going to put on 2 for quickness, and this match always, so you can do by mesh name or always. So by mesh name, if you name your each individual part a name and then underscore low, for example, in the low poly, and then if you name it exactly the same but underscore high in the high poly, that'll mean it'll only bake them two together. The reason we'll do this is because if there's two meshes next to each other and we don't want the bake to affect each other, then we can give them different suffix names. But I'm just going to do always because this is just all one mesh and we haven't named them any differently or split them up. So with that done, I'm just going to bake selected textures. Right, now it's done, we can have a look at our mesh. So as you can see, some of these places are baked in very nicely. So we have our detail, we have the little trims, we have the little knobs here. So of course we could have added these low poly geometry in and then just used the high poly to smooth these edges. But we went a bit more advanced and just did everything a lot more low poly. Now this is fine for a mesh that's going to be further away, but if it's more detailed you might want to add them little changes into the low poly. But of course you don't want to go as high as we did with the original and smooth the high poly original and smooth it all out, because then the mesh would become way too high poly for a game engine. So now we have that, we're just going to quickly texture the model. So let's just get a metal, so I'm just going to type in metal and find one that we like. So if I just clear our search and just type in metal again, we're going to get a lot more different options. See what machinery looks like. That looks too plasticky to me, so we're just going to keep looking, see if we can get steel painted. That might work okay. We'll choose an older one, maybe something like that. Now if we change the colour in the metal fill, if that is where the colour is, oh there's a paint, so instead of the red let's maybe, I don't know, choose a green. And now we only want the top to be green. So if we get our reference and see what areas are going to be like that, we can also sample colours of course. So if you hold on the dropper and change that, So this section and these sections were metal, and then the handle stick was wood. So I'm just going to right click on this and just choose black mask. And then we're going to paint in this mask using this selection, and I'm just going to use the UV selection. And with it on white, that means it's going to add this. So I'm just going to drag select those sections. As you can see, this whole area goes like that, so we don't want that. And because we added a loop here, I'm just going to go into face and select these faces. And then I'm going to do the same for the bottom, because that was metal. And then we're going to get a wood for the handle. Any wood. I don't have any of my materials set up now, so let's just place anything in, and that works quite nicely. And then, as you can see, we pretty much have our grenade nice and done with all these little details baked in that isn't actually geometry. And then another thing we can do, so if I add a fill layer, if I right click and go to color selection and pick color, because we added these dots as a different material, we can now mask them out specifically, and now they can be a different color. And with this we can also change the height, so it appears like it bulges out more in the height and normal map. I'm just going to lower that down and increase the metallicness. And there we go, we have our nice grenade mesh. So yeah, so now we can export them textures into the engine. I won't do this in this video because it's already went on so long, but I will link the video from exporting Substance Painter textures into Unreal Engine. So I'll link that at the end of this video. If you've liked this video and found it helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing. It's completely free. And ring that notification bell when the next tutorials come out, and you will be notified. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.